So this movie is a reflection on the aftermath after those 20 years of internal armed conflict that happened in Peru during the 1980 till the 2000s. The armed conflict in Peru is considered the third longest in Latin America after the war in Colombia and the civil war in Guatemala. The official report from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission says that the total number of victims from the conflict is 69,000, but the number of disappeared without being identified is around 15,000. So this movie is about one of those 15,000 unrecognized bodies. So forced disappearance is considered a double crime. Why it's a double crime? Because it's a crime against the individual who has been forcibly removed, and then also the family of the disappeared. It's a crime against the relatives of this person who have been denied information about their whereabouts, who don't know the fate of their missing loved ones, and who have been left searching for information. Forced disappearance is a crime that destroys not only the individual who's the main victim, but also the families of the victim as well. So now I'm going to present to you again Rael. So he's going to tell us a little bit about his point of view, the movie, his reflection on it. Please, Rael. Thank you.
Thanks. When I earlier said that the movie has a universal appeal, I think, and I've heard the director, Héctor Gálvez, talked about it, how he wanted, there's two reasons why he didn't give you the political context into it. One of them is so you can understand and relate without knowing so much about the politics to the suffering of the woman looking for the victims, right? The relatives of the victims, and the other reason, and the other reason is also that this issue is still very controversial in Peru, even though there's proof of everything that happened, and there's a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that has a huge book where it tells you everything that happened. It's still debated. But in particular for Peruvians, those of us, or those who know the history of what happened, there's a lot of layers of emotional the feelings that develop when you see the movie, and also understanding of all the political stuff behind it that is still going on today. And it's a movie dealing about with the past, but also the present, right? It's like people in the present trying to deal with what happened to them, what happened to their relatives. As she was saying, that there's two crimes, and it's also, and not just crimes in terms of legality, but it's also, there's two things that people have to deal with a relative that has disappeared, but also society, and a society that contests what happened. They have to deal with their story being ignored. The fact that the relatives being disappeared is not, and it's not accepted by a good number of the population. And this movie, it's part of a wave of filmmakers in Peru dealing with the issues of this war, this internal war. But at the same time, it doesn't have a universal reach to Peru. The movie was shown only for 3 weeks in theaters in Peru, and most of the serious Peruvian movies are not shown for a longer term, as you can imagine. Like anywhere in the world, U.S. films are the ones that are shown the most. And I was saying it's very controversial. Around 30% of the population still deny the crimes of the government. Because there was two actors here in the internal war. Terrorist groups, Maoist, mainly a Maoist terrorist group that is responsible for almost 50% of the crimes, and around 40% of the crimes are on the part of the government. And around 30% of people still support one of the governments, or the political party behind this government is the Fujimori government. And so the role of the state is disputed, and people believe that in order for there to be true reconciliation, you need to accept the crimes. However, this Fujimori still has political power, and today, a few months ago, Fujimori was pardoned because of a political deal. He was pardoned. He was sentenced to prison for 25 years, but he was pardoned. And today, the Inter-American Court of Justice had a hearing on why the pardon was illegal. And a commission issued an order to cancel the pardon. And they did a recommendation to the International Court to cancel the pardon because Fujimori the Peruvian government has signed international agreements that have to be followed. So it's still disputed, and it will continue. There are huge protests that happen on Christmas Eve. Fujimori was pardoned, and the government did it on that day, thinking that there was not going to be a protest, but there was tens of thousands of people left the celebrations of Christmas in a Catholic country to hit the streets and protest. So when these movies are trying to deal with healing the wounds and acceptance, part of the population and the political forces are reopening the wounds even more. Something very important about the difference of what happened in Peru and other disappearances around Latin America with the military governments like in Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Chile, is that most of the disappeared were poor, innocent peasants, indigenous campesinos. Peasants is not the correct translation, but campesinos, Quechua-speaking indigenous, and yeah, they suffer in the hands of the government and the terrorist groups that are caught in between. And the movie doesn't tell you who committed the particular crimes that we're seeing, but the ones that had an interest in hiding what happened were the government. Actually, the Maoists were very proud of what they did. You know, they thought that through violence you can achieve a revolution. So they wanted to show the bodies of people being murdered, but the government was trying to hide. So a lot of the people that were hidden in the land were victims of the government. And it's very interesting. I'm just going to close with this. But what happened to pardon Fujimori has been called by a funny article in the New York Times as the Incan Game of Thrones. So if you want to look into the politics that are happening there, it's very interesting. You could check it out.
Yes, you can hear me, right? Okay. I'm gonna make a comment from the point of view of the viewer, the unavoidable literary scholar, cultural studies viewer that I am. At the same time that I identify the whole story and all the places that are shown and the atmosphere and the dilemmas of the characters. So first, I'm going to make a comment, and then I'm going to end with a second comment that I hope will become an open question for all of us, as well as for all of you. The first comment is that this contrast, this amazing contrast between extreme violence and the desacralization of the human life and the human body that is expressed in the way these remains are found, and the work of forensic anthropologists that discover how or find out how these people were killed, how they died. And the body number 9 that they found, they say they really tortured him. They tormented him way more than the other 8 bodies that were there. So, and this is a theme that crosses the story and the film. And at the same time, the contrast is offered by the way that extreme care, like it's kind of the holy care that forensic anthropologists take on cleaning the remains, taking with extreme care and very softly the remains, all remains, and how they put them together or try to put the picture together on the table, and the way they talk to the relatives of these people. So that contrast is throughout the film, and that's very interesting to me, you know, because one is extreme violence and the other one is an amazing care, trying to offer a relief to the relatives that are looking for the lost ones, and try to help them to have closure. So that is one comment that I found extremely well developed in the film, and it's one of the features I like very much, without saying words. It's all actions, and it's the message is very clear. And the second comment that ends in a question for all of us is the dilemma, the ethical dilemma to which the main character and the team of forensic anthropologists encounter and discuss throughout the film. And when someone, when we lose someone we love dearly, no matter how, yeah, but even more so when it's a victim of a crime, the sense of loss is gigantic, it's ineffable. We cannot express it with words, right? And then we need closure. We as human beings need closure. And that is part of the funeral rites that we undertake when we bury our dead, yeah, our dead relatives or our dead loved ones. And the problem here is that people like Graciela, one of the characters, she doesn't have closure. 25 years have passed, or 30 years, and she doesn't have closure. So it's a constant, or it's an open wound. And then there is this dilemma of the main character, Fidel, especially Fidel, well, his team as well, but Fidel, that he realizes, what do I do now? There is this body that is not the husband of Graciela, but there is this woman who is lingering, or whose suffering is lingering non-stop, you know. So what do I do? What do I tell the truth and just let her continue suffering, probably until the day she dies? Or do I match a body that nobody claims, and a widow who is looking for closure? And the end of the film tells you clearly what's the final decision that Fidel makes. So the question open for all of us is, what would you do in that case? And that will open perhaps a discussion among us. What you are confronted with this ethical dilemma, and there is this position. We have to tell the truth. We cannot tell lies, but at the same time there is compassion, and there is the necessity to give closure to the human pain for the loss of a beloved one. So that's another powerful message of the film that I would very much like for us to discuss and reflect. There is no right answer. There is no right choice in any case.
Thank you. So as the non-area specialist, I guess my questions are maybe a bit more broader, and how this fits in what we've seen, or the kind of trajectory of human rights witnessing and documentation. So from a period during the Cold War where there was the idea that as much as we can expose and document, then even if there isn't some kind of legal process that gives justice, that there will be shaming of governments and that there will be an effect. And I think even after the end of this period, it continues in terms of gathering evidence and sort of, the forensic scientists compiling all this evidence and the hopes of the people to go to court. And then for me, one of the heartbreaking scenes was when Fidel is looking at all of their work that they've, as you said, so carefully and diligently and in that sacred sense almost sort of reconstructed, is then left out on the roof and is, decomposing. There is the question that you're pointing out about the ethical responsibility of the forensic scientist in between providing closure and truth. But I think there's also a further problem for the survivors and more broadly the human rights communities. I'm thinking of Indonesia, where it's been 50 years with no closure, with a lot of impunity, less forensic evidence. They've been less able to do exhumations. But at a certain point, when you have all this evidence and no justice, that's also a problem for survivors. And I think that the movie is presenting what I would like to think of as more of an affective truth than a legal truth, being how hard it is, how impossible it may be to actually get the scientific evidence to line up with the broader national narratives and the individual stories that people need closure on. But then that there's something that rings true about the suffering, about the difficult choices, and about the impossibility of all kinds of processes in the aftermath of this kind of suffering and violence.
It's interesting that all the comments have been around the topic of politics of memory and how countries and societies deal with them, and what are the intentions from the political groups and the nation as a whole to deal with these memories, especially with the uncomfortable memories. For example, memories that are not dealt with or that try to keep silent. Also, the memories, these memories that are related to a political discourse, especially in Peru nowadays, a political discourse around the years of the violence that aims officially towards reconciliation and forgiveness, but actually implies forgetfulness, and how these bodies are an expression, and the memories of the lost one and the families of the victims are an expression of a desire to not forget. And I think that the expressions that Rael was talking about, all the marches and the thousands of people that are saying no to politics that are trying to forget and trying to erase the stories of impunity, they are trying to fight against this desire for forgetfulness. So maybe we can open the discussion and questions around that and other matters that maybe the audience wants to bring about. Yes, please.
I just wanted to say hi. I'm a Guatemalan and I grew up in Guatemala, so I was listening to the whole Peru situation, and it's like talking about Guatemala. It's identical. The whole post-Civil War process is the same, and this is really sad. We have so many of those stories in Latin America. And what I wanted to mention that you guys didn't talk about is this sentence that they say in the movie really hit me when the guy says, he's sleepy. Let him sleep. Soon he's not gonna be able to sleep, because it weighs so heavily in people who is dealing with those things, and it really wears you out in many areas of your life. Number one, and the other one that I wanted to pose more like a question is, we didn't talk about the picture. The picture, I think, is a big deal. And I just finished reading a Guatemalan book. There's so much art now about the war thing. I don't know if you guys hear about Puente Adentro. It's a really good book about the post-Guatemalan war. And it speaks about the human imperfections of all, even the guys who got killed during the war, even the victims were just humans, and they had so many imperfections, and you don't talk about them. I was thinking, did this guy had a second relationship? Was he having an affair with this really young lady, which is not to be condemned? There's another angle that is to be, I think it should be discussed. And I couldn't make any conclusion about the picture, and I don't know if people did.
Well, I think that in my personal analysis is that the picture could belong to Graciela's husband, but also could belong to another victim, because as they said, sometimes the victim exchange clothes, or they give each other clothes, but it tells also a story, as you mentioned, of these other lives, and we could bring to the conversation also the other narratives, the other points of view of the perpetrators, because in a lot of occasions the members of the terrorist groups were forced to be part of them. Peasants, very, very poor people from very, very poor communities that were obligated, that were forced to be part of the terrorist groups, and they were captured by the Peruvian army and killed as they were members of the terrorist groups when they were forced to be one of them. And let's not forget that the whole origin, the whole beginning of these conflicts are in the huge inequalities that the Latin American countries have. So one of the origins of this conflict is poverty, lack of opportunities, and so something that is in the past of the perpetrators are like this profound emptiness for opportunities, this profound emptiness for something to look forward to, and that's part of an uncomfortable memory that the state doesn't want to deal with. I don't know if you have maybe more insight.
Just a quick comment. The story, the director started writing about this because of he was told by a friend who works doing cleaning the bodies and finding them, that the story about the picture. So it's a real story, and they never found out who was the woman on the pocket. So a lot of it is fictional, the story, but based in realities, like the story about the picture. And something else I wanted to mention is the problem, the question that you have posted to us, whether you would have given the body or not. It has to do also with the how hard it is to find and to match up the bodies, but it also has to do with how much the government is willing to put money, space, and finance, resources, advertisements, so that you find the person. So it's not completely a question with, and it's not like completely. There's no solution for this. There could be solutions for a lot of those missing bodies in person.
I want to add to the picture. The picture is very interesting because as an element within the narrative, it creates the suspense. The same suspense I'm sure that the character of Fidel has, that okay, this is gonna lead us to identifying the character or the body. And it also, it's a metaphor of what Claudia has said, this uncomfortable memory, because they finally get close to identify a person, a woman who says, no, that is not me. So we don't know if she's telling the truth or not. And perhaps it's an uncomfortable truth. And the fact that the bodies or the remains are in the roof, the top roof, led to decompose, to be completely effaced from the surface of the earth. That's what it is. And if you haven't been in Lima, Lima has 99% of humidity year round. Those remains are going to be decomposed extremely fast, yeah, when left like that. Yes, so that's it.
Something that you said was interesting to me about this kind of the global aspect of remembering like these large tragedies or many deaths and whatnot, trying to have some sort of closure, some sort of remembrance of that, and the importance of that. And I was wondering, does that happen? The only thing that really comes to mind is like the Holocaust. That the Holocaust did happen, and then there has been a lot of good work to try to never forget that sort of thing. But has that ever happened in any other country where there's been some sort of like a genocide or many lives lost, and there's been a successful campaign or process to remember it and somehow move past that or get grow as a result of that?
I can speak for Peru, and I think partially it has. Like, there was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the Fujimori went to jail. The leader of the Shining Path is in jail. Almost all the terrorists are in jail. So a lot of the society has accepted it, but and some bodies were found. So there is some closure, and it's not nowhere to be finished. But at least for Peru, the work has helped.
Yeah, I don't think there is anything in the case of Peru, which is what I know and experience. There has not been a systematic closure of things. What I perceive is more a direction, in spite of all these efforts, like the Truth Reconciliation Commission, there is a tendency of the government or the official institutions to erase it from the memory, to erase it from history. It's not taught in the history. Yeah, that's where you can see. It's not taught in the schools, it's not taught in the colleges, in the first years of college where we learned history of Peru. So that's where you see that narrative, to erase it. It's sad.
Sorry, I'm thinking of like the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was one of the first and is always held up as an example. And I think that there's been a long enough time since that to look, and I think even the one that everybody said, oh, this is great, this is a new methodology that we can share. I think there's been a lot of dissatisfaction, and that it hasn't resolved things. I think in some ways this is interesting to come back to the picture of the young woman, that maybe it's precisely what the photograph does in the story is for all of these people who are doing this all the time, the cases that they close in some ways are not, they're endless. So that's closure for that family, but then that they're the enigmatic stories stick out and that sort of compel the people to keep on going. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why some of the more powerful work that's being done is not, or maybe it's after the official process that tells the truth narrative and the specific who, what, when, where, than to kind of come up with the more artistic and human or humanistic sides of things that look at those questions more broadly.
Thank you so much for your comments and your participation in this panel, especially for the importance